Happy Tuesday night, everybody. Welcome into another edition of GC Live Talking Tuesday Nights. I'm Mike Yuva. Intern Joe is off because, well, it's spring break. So we're also going to give the intern a week off as he is back home to visit his family. But you know what? There's a lot to get into. A lot to get into. We're just a week away until spring football starts up for South Carolina. Last week on this show, we had plenty to talk about in terms of looking ahead to spring football. We also wanted to know some of the guys that we'd be talking to on Thursday. What would they say? What would some of those transfers say? Well, since that last show, we heard from all 9 of them. We heard from Shane Beamer himself as well. So there's a little bit more information that we can get into now as spring football, like I said, just a week away. We also had 5 Gamecocks out in Indianapolis at the NFL Combine. We can recap that as well. And any other questions you guys have on this Tuesday night. Good to see people coming on in. We have the baseball game going on as we speak. South Carolina taking on the Citadel, but kind of like going to the movie theaters on any day of the week, really. You can say on a Tuesday, though. Just because there's one movie going on doesn't mean that's the only movie being shown in the theater. So if you want your football dosage tonight, we got it covered for you. And we will do that for you all year long like we have here at Gamecock Central. Let's see. Were there any red shirts in basketball? Red shirts. So let's get into last week with the 9 transfers speaking to the media. The biggest thing that I took away is just outside of the fact that Luke Day's winter workout had these guys huffing and puffing. I think I was really impressed by some of the things that Trey Knox had to say about Dal Loggins. Now, of course, he was his positional coach at Arkansas, as we all know. But one thing that that really stood out to me about what he said was he's a good teacher. He's not just someone that knows what he's talking about. He can teach it. I can tell you from my days of playing, I can tell you from talking to some of the players since I got here in 2016. And not just Gamecocks, but I mean, I could go to other programs as well that I've covered over the years. And if, whatever the case may be, you can have a phenomenal coach. You can have a really good freaking coach. But if they don't know how to teach, if they don't know how to connect with the players, it's all for nothing. It's all for nothing. And at times, I felt like that was the case with Marcus Satterfield. I felt like Sat knew what he was doing, but he wasn't able to connect with the players for one reason or another. I'm not saying that's the case for everybody, but that certainly was the case for a couple players who I've spoke to. And I'm sure that there are more players in that locker room or were in that locker room. As Kevin gives us an update on baseball. Appreciate it, Kev. There were more players in that locker room that felt that way about Sat last year. That at times it was less about, oh, he doesn't know what he's doing. No. He knew what he was doing. He just wasn't able to teach it in a manner in which those players needed to receive it. So to hear Trey Knox say that, number one, is something that's extremely underrated. Extremely underrated. We could talk about X's and O's. We could talk about recruiting. All that stuff's great. It's very important, right? That's the reason why Beamer brought him in here. But never undervalue some of the most basic things when it comes to coaching, which is just simply being a good teacher. Being a good teacher. So to hear Trey Knox say that should not only excite you, because again, as we mentioned many, many times in this program, as we've mentioned many times on Gamecock Central, at the end of the day, what Dal Loggins does on Saturdays as a play caller, that's how he's going to be ultimately judged. All right. He can recruit his tail off. He can help bring in high 4 stars, 5 stars. What he does as a play caller on Saturday is what he'll ultimately be judged for. But hearing Knox say that, again, very good. Nick Gargiulo, the transfer from Yale. In addition to some of the things I've heard from how he's looked in these winter workouts, which is he's finishing towards the top when it comes to running for his position, which is a good sign of just being a leader, his mobility. This is a guy that I've mentioned before. I mentioned it today on Gamecock Central, that he's the early candidate to replace Eric Douglas at center. And as much as we can sit here and joke around about how Eric Douglas was here for years, right? He was here for like freaking 8 years. I remember, I think it was going into his sophomore year. He was an intern for me over at Watch Fox. That's how long ago it was. Being able to have someone come in and replace an Eric Douglas is not easy. It's not easy. It's a position that, as much as we want to talk about the return of Spencer Rattler, as much as we want to talk about the return of Juice Wells, and that's great, it means absolutely nothing going from B to C in terms of QB to receiver if you can't go from A to B, which is just making things simple on the QB for the center. That relationship, that dynamic, as I asked Gargiulo, he said that he's been able to build good chemistry with Rattler as well as the other quarterbacks. In the offensive line, he's getting along with those guys. Again, as we've mentioned, South Carolina is losing over 50%. Think about that. They're losing over 50% of their starting snaps on the offensive line compared to a year ago. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have returners on the offensive line. It just means that from the phrase we always use, proven depth standpoint, you're losing proven depth. But being able to have Douglas get over there, being able to have Gargiulo come in there and replace a guy like Douglas, it's going to be able to help. It's going to be able to help free up guys like Vershawn Lee, Trey Jones. They can focus on guard, right? I mean, those are just two of the guys that I'm mentioning. But the point being is, if Gargiulo is able to come in there, that's going to take a huge burden off not just the offensive line, but play calling as a whole. Another guy that we heard from, Mario Anderson. Mario, I mean, it's incredible what a difference 5 months can make. I mean, think about it. 5 months ago, you have Marshawn Lloyd. You knew Christian Beal-Smith was going to be out of eligibility once the year came to an end, right? With eligibility expiring after this past season. You also had Jaheim Bell playing running back a good bit towards the end of the stretch of the year. Well, what happens? Bell's gone. Christian Beal-Smith, like I said, out of eligibility. Marshawn Lloyd, he transfers. Shad Amos, he's gone. And now the news within the last week, Lavassier Carroll has retired for undisclosed medical reasons. So Mario comes in not only already in a thin running back room. Again, the phrase we use, an unproven depth standpoint is a position. They don't have the depth right now, the proven depth. It's Juju McDowell right now, right? And then you could have thrown in Lavassier again. Okay, we'll see what happens. And I know there's other guys in that room, but that's the focus, right? Focus would be on Juju. Mario comes in. It's like, all right, see what Mario's able to do. You have Dontavius Braswell coming out of high school. Who knows how long it's going to take him to be able to get up to speed before you're considering just throwing him out there. I mean, Juju picked things up quickly his freshman year, as we know, but then again, circumstances were a little bit different. You had a new coach, South Carolina. Sometimes those things work out a little different from a dynamic standpoint. But bottom line is thin running back room. But because of the news with Lavassier this past week, Mario now goes into a situation where, okay, he's going to have an opportunity to compete for some playing time. He could be used as a valuable tool for USC. And as I've said many, many times before, look at a guy like Carlins Patel. You look at a guy like Nate Atkins. You can go down the list. Juice Wells, keep going down. Jason Brown. In Beamer's first 2 years, he has proven that he's not afraid to take a shot on an FCS player, on a Division II player, and be able to bring them up. And he will give you that opportunity. That's something that Patel and we've talked about ad nauseum. How when he got here, he was shocked. He was shocked how not just Beamer, because obviously it works both ways, offense, defense, and Beamer's just overseeing everything as head coach, but Clayton White, Torian Gray, just the coaches on this staff as a whole, they didn't care where you came from. If you were able to get the job done, they were going to find a way to get you on the field. So with Mario, right, again, comes into the situation already where in the short sample size that we have with Beamer and this coaching staff, they have proven that they're not afraid. They're not afraid to take chances on guys that played, again, FCS, Division II, wherever they came from. But now he's in a situation where they're even more desperate for a running back. Because not that Lavoisier, I was expecting him to be the guy. But you look at Juju, as much as I love Juju, as much as I enjoy watching Juju, and I'm sure a lot of you do too, even though the game has shifted and you're not seeing guys get 30, 35, 40 carries a game, there's always going to be outliers across the country, right? It's always going to be outliers. But in terms of breaking it down, averaging, I mean, come on. But even with that being said, are we expecting Juju to touch the ball 20 times a game? Let me take that back. Are we expecting Juju to run the ball 20 times a game? He might get some touches in the passing game, 3, 4, 5 receptions a game. So if you want to say touches, you could say 20, okay. But 20 carries? No. Mario, his stock right now, if this we're talking about stocks, Mario, Nick Gargiulo, I said Trey Knox, but Mario and Gargiulo, those are the two I would buy a lot of stock in right now. A lot of stock, especially when we're talking about transfers. Mario's going to have his opportunity. Mario's not just going to have his opportunity, but he's going to have a golden opportunity because, again, room's thin. And Dontavius, he's going to have an advantage over him. Can he make the most out of it now, though? Can he make the most out of it? Because at some point, Dontavius will catch up. And will Mario have took a step forward with that opportunity that he's being given? I think Mario can do that. And as I've mentioned before, Nate Atkins, Carlins Patel, he doesn't have to go out here and be this all-conference guy to be a success. All right? Juice comes in. We know what Juice was able to do last year. Second in the conference in receiving yards. We understand that. No question about it. And that's not to say that Mario can't be better than what I'm trying to hint at here. But he doesn't need to be put on a pedestal where it's like he has to be that because of what the room's looking like right now. Just go out there and do what they need you to do. Just go out there and do, Jason, who's going to carry the ball 4th and 2 right now without seeing spring ball right now, which is tough, right? Because we don't know what Mario's going to look like once he gets out there and he's going up against guys that are a little bit faster. I had a chance to cover Newberry for a couple of years. They have some dudes. There's no question about it. And I know there's guys in here, girls listening, and you know that the caliber of talent at Newberry. Is it the same as the SEC? Certainly not. Certainly not. But as a former D2 guy, I can tell you that D2 speed is different from the D2 speed I saw most of the time, week in and week out. I saw some good talent. I saw some good speed. The speed in that conference is a little bit faster. I think Mario's going to adjust just fine. I think what it comes down to is, and the good thing for him is, just like the rest of the running backs in that room, and just like the offense as a whole, they're going to be walking into a completely different system on offense. Completely different system. There's going to be things that, at the end of the day, I mean, like when you're talking about a passing tree, right? There's only 10 different routes you could run. If you want to throw the 0 in there too. So when you go to passing tree, the terminology will change, the language will change, but at the end of the day, there's only so much that you can do. If Mario can pick that up, he's going to be just fine. At the end of the day, it's just playing football. At the end of the day, it's just playing ball. How quickly can he pick up on the terminology so that he's able to go out there and he's not going to have to think? That he can just go out there and just play. Because for some guys, when they come in here, they have an opportunity to take advantage of spring football. Some guys don't when they transfer in, and they have to wait until August. He's going to have a chance to be able to come out there, and he's going to be able to pick up the playbook, hopefully quickly. But if there is that learning curve, if he hits that point where there's a little bit of a speed bump, don't panic. He has all summer. He's going to have his chance, though, to be able to pick up on things a little bit quicker, though, in comparison to, like I said, waiting until August. Going to take a chance to look at some of these questions here. Posting one of these links out, though, for the show. Appreciate you guys watching. If you're just tuning in, intern Joe, he's enjoying spring break. We're not going to take the college kid away from his enjoyment this week. GC Live talking Tuesday nights. As we put this quick tweet out here, get more people on in here, but we appreciate everyone that is listening here, and we will get into your questions because there looks like there is a good amount of it. How we doing, Granny Reese? Long time no talk. Long time supporter of Watch Fox. That's how I got to know Granny. Appreciate you, Granny. All right. Now that that's taken care of, we'll kind of just go through some of these. Some of these might kind of be all over the map here. Rush just keeps clearing every hurdle. He's setting himself up nicely. Darius Rush did a phenomenal job at the combine. Phenomenal job at the combine. I do want to put some of the combine talk at the end. But I can tell you this, from the moment that Darius arrived at South Carolina, going from wide receiver to defensive back, being a special teams just grinder. He's everything that's right with the way a player handles adversity. And it's just been incredible just to watch him grow. And he's a guy that has now helped his draft stock go up to a point where he could be a day 2 guy. He could be getting drafted in the 3rd round. And obviously he'll have an opportunity to do a little bit more if he wants at Pro Day, which is next Monday. So again, we'll get into that. Rush, one of 5 Gamecocks that took part in Pro Day last week. I should say the Combine. Pro Day coming up next week at South Carolina. Zachary says, totally agree with you, Mike. There was a disconnect between Sat and the players. There was a disconnect to a point, especially the first year. Again, when you get information from people that are close with the program or a player himself talks to you, you always have to vet your sources, right? Try to figure out if it's coming from a player, if it's coming from someone that's close with the program, what's their connection with player X, Y, Z, wherever the case may be. Because sometimes you get disgruntled players. Sometimes you get disgruntled members of an organization. But what I can tell you is, from the people that I spoke with, especially that first year, there was a lot of confusion, especially up front with the blocking scheme. And that frustration led to the results that we saw those first couple games where it was just, what the hell's going on each week? Why aren't they able to build off of any type of success they had from the week prior? And as I've mentioned before, trying to have like a circle, right? Like a hole, and you have like a rectangular block and you're just trying to fit it in that circle. It's just not working. It's just not working. That's the best way to describe some of the confusion and some of the frustration from year 1 with Satterfield. And as we saw, even in year 1, when USC was able to get things going, you could see what Sat was trying to do. And then in year 2, and I know people have their tinfoil hats on. Oh, I'm not going to believe Sat called this and that. Fine, have at it. You feel like you're a big person because you're good for you. I mean, what more do you need? Do you need someone actually filming Sat holding a play sheet? Sad people out there. But with that being said, Sat was able to do things last year that they were able to get going and they was able to work. And the reason being is because he did simplify it. I mean, there's really nothing crazy to it. He simplified not just the play calling, but he simplified his teachings and how he spoke to players, something that he struggled with in year 1. So again, if you're just joining us, one of the comments that I brought up was the comment that Knox brought up on last Thursday We had a chance to speak with 9 of USC's newest players via the transfer portal, and Knox mentioned that having the opportunity to be coached by Dal Loggins over in Arkansas, that Loggins is a phenomenal teacher. Again, you could have great coaches. I mean, I've been around some good coaches. I've been coached by good coaches, whether it be high school, college, whatever the case may be. There's a difference, though, when a coach just doesn't know how to connect with his players. They don't know how to explain it. I mean, I've worked with people. I've worked for people who are great bosses. They don't know how to communicate with people. And that can be frustrating. And that can lead to a disconnect. So when I think about this situation with Dal Loggins and the stuff that Knox brought up, because again, ultimately Loggins is going to be judged for what he does on Saturdays as a play caller. The recruiting, the teaching, that's all great. It's all part of it. But what he does on Saturday. So we could talk about this. That's talking season, right? If he's able to have those relationships with players, if he's able to build that type of chemistry, which going back to another quote that we heard just a couple weeks ago right here on Gamecock Central in an exclusive with Alshon Jeffrey, who had an opportunity to be coached by Dal. Alshon told me that he is very direct with players. He's not going to sugarcoat it. He's not going to BS you. If you want something done a certain way, if you're not doing it a certain way, he's going to tell you. To me, that's the best way to be coached. All right. And we could sit here and go through this whole freaking society thing and coddling players and soft society. Some guys, you need to coach them differently. And that's not even this generation deal. That's something that's been going on for years, right? Belichick's talked about it before. Doesn't matter if he was coaching Lawrence Taylor or someone else. I mean, the way he coached Lawrence is going to be a little bit different. You're not going to be able to treat every player the same exact way. Just like companies, you're not always going to treat every employee the same exact way. It's just not how it works. It's not, because if you do it that way, your company is going to sink quickly. And in this case, the company is USC football's offense. Kevin, what Knox said about Sellers is eye-opening, eye-popping to go along with the squat numbers. Yeah, what Sellers did from a squat standpoint, if you don't know what Kevin's talking about, I want to make sure I have the exact numbers up here. 540 pounds is what Sellers was able to squat. They do their testing, max results. See if I can get that video up here for those of you that don't know what we're talking about. This was from this past week. Try to pull this up here.
Squat max today.
So this is the video that Kevin was referring to. And Sellers squatted 540 pounds. Now, I might ask, why is that important for a quarterback?
Squat max today.
Right? Why is that important for a quarterback to squat that much? Is it even necessary? Is it even needed? Okay? I get that. But at the same time, too, I like my QB when he's tough. I like when my quarterback's got a little pop and power to him, especially when it comes from the legs, right? So you think of just this past year with the Super Bowl, Jalen Hurts and what he was able to do with Philly, right? Those short yardage situations. Outside of the rugby scrum style, that offense of the play calling, where just the formation, you just have all the guys kind of just pushing forward. Outside of having that, you have a quarterback that just absolutely squats the freaking moon. Doesn't hurt. I think the other thing that really stood out to me more than just the fact that Sellers was able to squat that much is just the jump. I think it was like 300 something, 310. And he goes up 200 something pounds in a short period of time, January to just last week. I think that speaks volumes of not just Luke Day's workout program, but how he attacked it. Sellers. And we've seen that before, not just with Sellers, but other players. But that other quote that you're talking about with Knox, Kevin, yeah, I think he said he has the best arm he's seen, strongest arm, something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing. And just the way he flicks it. That room, and I've said this before, but to compare it to something that we've seen, and I know Gamecock fans get upset sometimes when I bring Clemson into it, but I think it's a good comparison of what you would like to see. What Clemson's been able to do over the last decade, they've been able to build up a factory when it comes to certain positions, and quarterback's one of them. And with South Carolina, what they're doing right now, when you look at that quarterback room, now in comparison to, say, what, the last 5-6 years, how deep has it really been? Right? I mean, think back a couple of years ago, Beamer's first year, musical chairs. I don't need to explain that to South Carolina, that you're one play away from getting hurt. Because Gamecock fans know that better than anybody because of that 2021 season. 4 different starting quarterbacks. Of course, that fourth one being to carry on Joyner in the Duke's Mayo Bowl, and that was by choice. But the other 3, you had injuries at one point or the other of the season with them. So to have a room that's that deep, and again, going back to our phrase, there's some unproven depth there, no question about it. Sellers being one of them. If you're able to get to a position where you're feeling good, and God forbid something happens with QB1 or QB2, whatever the case may be, you feel confident that you can insert, the third string quarterback here to 2 or 2 up to 1, whatever the case may be. And you pray to God those situations never happen. But outside of that, which is the obvious, right? You're also preparing for the future. And at some point, yes, not just the quarterback room, but any positional group, when you're able to develop that much talent, of course, guys might transfer out along the way. Again, it's happened at Clemson. It's happened at other schools. Alabama, Jalen Hurts, his situation, right? He goes to Oklahoma. It happens in college football. But the point being is that was a very, very powerful endorsement from Knox to say that. And I think it's one that Gamecock fans should enjoy. Missed that part. What did he say about Sellers? And Ryan is catching up. That's what he was talking about. Brent says, period. And they are much more appreciative and hungry. Coach Beamer is the man. No question. Talking about, I'm assuming, the part where I was talking about the transfers coming in here. And again, and I asked Beamer about that, the FCS, the Division II guys, because I know it's a small sample size, but he's done a really good job on that. Really good job. And just like any transfer, there'll be misses along the way. I wouldn't say USC has missed terribly on any of these transfers. I mean, there's been injuries, right? Dawkins, he's banged up. Devontae Reed, he got injured last year. I mean, it's you're never going to bat 1,000, but at the same time, too, there's going to be things that you just can't control. Guys got to stay healthy, right? And it's part of the game, unfortunately. Ryan again says, Kevin, what Knox said is what I'm asking about. Yep, that's what we were talking about, Ryan. Some of those things that he was talking about with how he was impressed by Kevin Shears, what he was impressed with Sellers. Brent Beamer has given both those OCs very nice positions to be successful. I'm excited to see what Loggins does with the talent. So I brought this up on Gamecock Central the other day, and I'm not trying to be the wet blanket in the room, but I think it's because it goes down to, what Mikkel's saying. Do you think we can win the SEC East this year? I don't. And that's not to say that this team isn't getting better, but we also have to realize, look, as good as South Carolina has looked over the last couple of years, and they're getting better and making strides, Georgia is light years ahead of everybody else. And that's not to say South Carolina can't start to close that gap. Right? Georgia's going to be losing guys just like every team's losing players. Coaches leave, whatever the case may be. But in order to close that gap, like we even saw with Clemson, it just doesn't happen overnight. Obviously, Clemson, they've gone in a different direction, at least last year, in the last 2 years, in comparison to where Georgia has been the last 2 years, being the two-time defending national champs right now. So what I would say to that is what USC needs to do is, number one, just worry about what's on your plate. Obviously, you'll have an opportunity to go into Athens and play those two-time defending national champ Bulldogs early in the season. And this goes back to my point with Brent, and another reason why I am skeptical as to why I don't believe USC can win the SEC East this year. There's going to be growing pains early on in the season with the shift over to OC. I don't expect them to go out and it's not even the non-conference game. I'm talking about what you get in the conference play and put up 30, 40 points. I think there's going to be some people that hope to see that, and I'd love to be proven wrong with that. I just think there's going to be a learning curve. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, again, you have an offensive line, which, yes, you have players coming back from last year, but as a unit, these guys haven't worked with each other. There's going to be growing pains, naturally. So the question now becomes, what can Dal do to alleviate some of those growing pains? Is it going back to the man blocking scheme and doing more man blocking in comparison to zone blocking, which we saw the past 2 years, and how USC's offensive line struggled with it? Not just at times, but I felt like throughout the course of the 2 years that Satterfield was here. I mean, look, even go back to that Clemson game, especially that first half. Look how many times USC allowed guys just to come flying in untouched. And it's not just on the offensive line. Some of that can go back to Rattler. Some of that can go back on the tight end. Some of that can also go back on the running backs, missing blocking assignments. But there were times, and I just remember one play in particular, I think I tweeted about it. There were three offensive linemen going after one guy. And a guy came free, and I think that was actually the safety. When Rattler, I can't remember if he was down, he threw it away. I can't remember, but it was called a safety. I think you guys know what play I'm talking about. How quickly can they get past that? And while Tennessee, it's going to look different. You don't have Hooker. You don't have Jalen Hyatt. They're still a very talented team. I do believe that South Carolina can finish ahead of Tennessee this year. I do believe they can finish ahead of Kentucky. They can beat Florida. I think they can do those things. I think they can finish second in the SEC East. And if you can get yourself in that position, go back to Mikkel's question, if you can get yourself in that spot, look, even if you can't beat Georgia early on in the year, or maybe you can, whatever the case may be, if you can get there, though, now you're giving yourself an opportunity. And then anything can happen, right? Injuries can happen to other teams. And I mean, bottom line is you want to just be there. You want to be able to be in that spot before you start talking about that stuff. That's just my take on it. Chris says, are all our tight ends capable of run blocking, or will some only be used in the passing game? I think when you look at this tight end room, and I'm not going to include Nicholas Harbor quite yet, because I feel like it's unfair, number one, to him, but I also feel like we need to see how USC is going to use him. We can sit here and speculate. I think the coaches, they have an idea, but I don't think they truly know how they want to use him. And I think two of the reasons being is, one, you want to get him out there first, right? You want to see how he looks like in your offense. How is he able to pick up concepts, playbook, all that kind of stuff, right? That's number one. Number two is, what do these guys look like, the guys that are currently on campus? Because obviously Nicholas isn't here yet. But what do they do this spring to make you feel good about, maybe skeptical about whatever the case may be, because that's also going to help answer questions as to what you need in the fall, right? We've talked about it before. If South Carolina struggles, and again, I know it's not just what you do at spring football, but it's going to give you a better idea as to what your strengths and weaknesses are heading into fall camp. If South Carolina struggles with blocking, if South Carolina is not able to do certain things from the tight end position, or maybe the receivers just aren't able to get releases, or the running backs are struggling with blocking, you might see 2 tight end sets. It feels like they're going to be doing a lot of 2 tight end sets, even if that's not necessarily the case, because they have the bodies to do it. I think, Chris, to answer your question, I think the tight ends they've brought in here, I think they're all capable of being dual threat, is how I look at it. But I also think there's some guys that you might not necessarily need this year as much, or if you see them, they could be blockers. Nick Elsness is a guy that I feel like USC will use more as a blocking tight end. I feel like if I had to compare him to what we might see with him this year, I could see kind of that Nick Muse role where you're blocking more than anything. And I know Nick, his senior year, they used him a little bit more in the passing game, but Nick mainly was a blocker. Nick was mainly a blocker and just a special teams grinder. And that's what I expect Elksness to do. He made the joke the other day that he knows he's not Kyle Pitts. He came in there to Florida. Kyle Pitts was he's like, I know I'm not Kyle Pitts. So I think Trey Knox, I think obviously with his background being a former wide receiver, or at least recruited as a receiver at Arkansas, actually was in the same room. He was recruited by Justin Stepp when Justin was still over at Arkansas. He has that wide receiver mindset. And as he told us last Thursday, he expects South Carolina to use him as a pass catcher more than how, well, Arkansas took advantage of that. Brent says, how did Jalen Brooks finish up on the combine? I know one thing that will stand out to people will be how he ran his 40, 4.69 to 4.7. I'm not 100% sure if he'll run another 40 this upcoming week. Next week, on Monday, when South Carolina holds their pro day at USC. I will look into that because I think a lot of these guys, they have the hope that they'll just run in Indy, and then they're not going to have to worry about some of that stuff again. And again, it's not just the 40. It could be short shuttle, broad jump, whatever the case may be. I know that some of the guys didn't do short shuttle. I know some of the guys didn't do broad jump. I know some of the guys didn't do vertical, that they're going to do it back at South Carolina. So a guy like Brooks, maybe he runs the 40, but at the same time too, and this is just my opinion, the reason why it's important for Brooks is more so because of special teams. Now, he's not out there on pads. None of these guys are out there on pads. That's why I think the combine, honestly, as the years pass on, some of this stuff, it's just like, what are we doing? I mean, there was an offensive lineman, I think he was from Southern Cal. Don't quote me on that. But there was an offensive lineman that was running the 40, and he tore, it was his ACL. And he went out there and he benched, I think it was like 38 reps. I think it was 39, and they took one away, so it was 38 of 225. What in the blue hell, to quote The Rock, what in the blue hell? Why do we need an offensive lineman running 40 freaking yards down the field? Why? What are we doing? Because years ago, Paul Brown wanted to figure out who he should put on special teams, and the average hang time for a punt and a kickoff, more so punt, is over that 4.5 mark, 4.67. So he wanted to get an idea as to which players could cover that ground that quick. So that's why the 40-yard dash is a thing in football. It's an old school measuring stick to find out who can play special teams more than anything. Because where else do you see guys running 40 yards in a straight freaking line? You don't. You don't. But with Jalen, going back to specifically talking about Jalen, I was impressed with some of the drills he did with the ball skills, staying on the line, and just being able to show off his hands. Because I think, look, end of the day, I think there were some people that were surprised that he got invited to the combine. I'm a big fan of Jalen, not just as a football player, as a person. I think his story from being a Division II receiver to working his way here to South Carolina and not being able to play right away because the NCAA was holding up his eligibility. He takes to the field. He does some great things and then comes back, personal issues, away from the team after only a couple games. Then he comes back, makes a big impact. I felt like he was strong. And then unfortunately, he's not able to play in the bowl game. So all these things happen, and yet he's able to go to the combine. I think it just speaks to kind of his story as a whole, that nothing has come easy to him and that he's always been dealt a hand that has been challenging, but he's found ways to overcome it. So I hope that Jalen can make the most out of Pro Day at South Carolina next Monday and that he will be able to earn himself at least an opportunity to compete on special teams somewhere and then work his way up from special teams to playing wide receiver. A couple more questions, and then we will take a quick timeout before we pick things up on the other side. Jason says, are we still going to bring in some transfer portal guys? That's what I'm assuming you mean from TP. I believe so. Something to keep in mind, the transfer portal, that second window for players to enter, will take place from May 1st to May 15th. So that time period when you're looking at the academic school year, that will allow players to make decisions after spring ball. Because as we've mentioned on this program before in the past, after winter workouts or even going into winter workouts, before players go home for winter break, they sit down with their positional coach, they sit down with their coordinator, even the head coach, and you lay out kind of the expectations you have for yourself, and the coaches lay out the expectations they have for you going into the next season. And sometimes the vision that players have, it turns out to be a little bit different once they get out there on the field for the following year for spring ball. And at that point, they realize, you know what? I'm going to go take my chances somewhere else, and I'm going to enter the portal. So I do believe that there'll be players, not just at USC, across the country. It's going to happen everywhere, I feel like, more often than not. You'll see players at USC enter the portal after spring ball. I have a feeling it's going to happen. But that aside, I think USC will go after players in the portal. I would assume a position of need will be running back. If Mario Anderson's able to come out and just have an absolutely phenomenal spring, Juju McDowell's great, right? I still think they're going to go after a running back. I just feel like that's going to be one of the positions they're going to go after. So I expect them to go hit the portal and don't limit it to just running back. I feel like outside of QB, I feel like they'll hit the portal hard for practically any position out there right now. Tight end run, yeah, we know that's pretty deep. Maybe that's another position I wouldn't hold my breath on. But I feel like for the most part, defensive back, that's a position I could think of that USC might want to add some depth at. Edge, of course, is another one that comes to mind. But I think running back is the one, if you want to make a wish list, right? Going grocery shopping and you're looking in the portal, it's like, all right, where we go? Oh, running back. Here we go. That's the first one that comes to mind. We're going to take a quick time out. When we come back, we'll pick things up on the other side. We got some more questions to answer. When we'll also get into a little bit more combine talk from this past week and also look ahead to the combine coming up, Pro Day at South Carolina. But first, got to make sure we're paying the bills here. And as you guys all know, tax season, it is upon us. Liberty Tax can make that process for you guys a hell of a lot easier. You can be able to overcome that tax anxiety by giving them a call at 803-462-5576. I'll tell you what, talking to so many people around this time of the year, it is amazing. It is amazing the difference by reaching out to a tax company to have them do your taxes, how much money you can save. I promise you. If you haven't done it before, you want to go online and do all these. No. Give Liberty Tax a call. They'll be able to save you a couple bucks. Knock on wood, we hope so. Today's program is also brought to you by our longtime friend and supporter of GC Live. That is Clint Hammond over at the Mortgage Network. If you want to be buying a home right now, well, as you guys know, for the last couple months, it has not been easy, but Clint can make that process a hell of a lot easier for you. He did that for former Gamecock quarterback Perry Orth. He also did it for our own Wes Mitchell, good friend of Wes. Give him a call at 803-576-4450 and let Clint Hammond know that Gamecock Central sent you there. All right, guys, want to pick some more things up on this side with some of the questions. I do want to get into this, though, before we keep going down the list, because I mentioned about the NFL Combine that took place this past weekend in Indy. I feel like Darius Rush, out of all the guys, rose his draft. He brought his draft stock up higher than anyone else. And that's no disrespect to Cam Smith or any of the Zach Pickens, because I felt like the guys that were there for USC, I felt like they all did some good things. Zach looked really smooth, which isn't going to surprise a lot of people that have been following USC over the last couple of years, but he looked very smooth for a guy of that size. Very, very smooth. Javon Gwen, he's just the guy that I feel like if a team takes a chance on him, he's going to be able to do a lot of good things for them. I think some teams are going to look at him and say, all right, not the biggest guy, not the tallest guy in the world. He is a guy that just gets stuff done, brings some speed as well in terms of his quickness. So that's another guy I would keep an eye on. We mentioned Darius Rush, 4.37 in the 40. 4.37. And I've been watching, I think it was Jim Nagy of the Senior Bowl. He's been posting videos the last couple of days. Just the footwork from the Senior Bowl of Rush. It just speaks volumes. And I think the most amazing part about it is this. As we mentioned, Rush was playing receiver, and then he moved over to defensive back. And I apologize, I'm a little under the weather tonight, so a little congested. Sorry for sounding like Snuffleupagus over here. But I think it just goes to show you that Torian Gray, the coach, is here. You can give credit to the previous coaching staff, but I think he's still raw. And that's no disrespect against Torian Gray or Clayton White, but I think being able to work on your skills here at South Carolina as a raw defensive back, and then you have an opportunity to go play at the next level, I think he's only going to get better. I truly do. I think he's only going to get better because he's still learning how to play the position. He's still learning how to play the position. Mention Zach Pickens. Zach, again, for a guy that size, I mean, he's what he weighed in at 291. Ran a 4.89. 4.89. 22 reps on the bench. Short shuttle, 4.62. Very impressed with Zach. And I think he's a guy that can also go in that third, fourth round. Cam Smith. Cam, of course, we know he had a phenomenal season. And as I've said many times before, he's a guy that his stock is higher than what I think some of these draft experts have him as. And the reason being is because he's so versatile. He can play that nickel position. That's something that, yes, you can teach, but it's not easy to. And you need someone that's willing to play that position. Cam's not only willing to play it, but he's freaking good at it too. And as we've seen with college football just evolve over the years, and the NFL, you still see, I feel like, more 4.3s, but you see 4.25s just because, again, the game's evolving. In the NFL, you're going to try to catch up to it at times because the way it's played in college, we see so many 4.25 defenses in college. And the reason being is just because guys are getting faster, but they're big, but they're fast. Those tight ends, right? Tight ends can move And obviously, if you want to go back to the Tony Gonzalez days, Mark Bavaro, Gronk, of course, Travis Kelce, nowadays. But being able to find someone that can play that nickel position, if you have that that hybrid. But again, it's more so that slot. It's more so that slot receiver. But it's just the game has just changed so much. It's changed so much, and you really need someone that is versatile and can play that nickel spot. Some of the smartest professors are the worst at teaching. No question about it. No question. 3rd and 1. Yep, we're going down. And I know I'm trying to catch up to some of these comments from earlier. Jason says, Mike, anything's possible, but we aren't there yet. Yeah, and look, it's not trying to be it's not trying to be a Debbie Downer here. I hope sooner rather than later that Beamer can bring a championship, right? Conference championship, and continue to work your way up to the ultimate goal one day. But I'm optimistic that Beamer can be that guy. Now, the toughest part, as we know in all sports, and Don Staley can tell you that with women's basketball, and I don't care what the sport is to be good consistently over a period of time. Now, obviously, that level of success, Don Staley in women's basketball, is different right now than what the men's football program, football program is looking like. But in order to get to that point, you need to climb those stairs. That's what Beamer and this coaching staff and this team has been doing the last couple of years, heading into year 3 now. And even though they're not on that type of level in comparison to women's basketball, in order to get to that point, you have to work up those steps and not fall down 2 steps if you go up 1. They've been able to go up steps 1, 2, 3. Don't go backwards now. Don't go backwards, right? I mean, you look back to the Will Muschamp era. And although I feel like where Beamer in this coaching staff and this program is right now in comparison to year 3 when Muschamp was here, I feel like they're ahead of that. We saw that there was momentum that USC had after 2 seasons, but they weren't able to turn that into anything that ultimately led this program to taking that next giant step forward. Now, I feel like in terms of having a foundation for this program, the foundation is stronger for Beamer because they've done a phenomenal job with recruiting. They've done a phenomenal job with having players that are bought in to doing whatever they need to do for the team. And now when you're talking about taking that next step from year 2 to year 3, you have guys that wanted to come back for another year. And I get it. All right, the transfer rules, I get. Juice Wells could have tested the waters of the NFL. Spencer Rattler could have tested the waters of the NFL. They didn't have to come back here. There's other guys here. If they wanted to go somewhere else, they could. They want to be here. There's going to be guys that enter the portal every year. So don't give me that. Okay? Go look at the list of how many players, Georgia, Alabama, LSU. I mean, just go down the list. LSU may have been one of the schools that actually had less transfers than South Carolina, but you get what I'm saying. There's a lot of schools, though, throughout the country that have guys that are entering the portal left and right because that's just the new world of college football that we're in. R.L. Smith, I like his size, 6'3", 215 to the spring weigh-ins. I believe we were talking about Sellers. J-Dub, what's the chance of South Carolina getting some more commits out of Dante Reno's high school? So Reno just recently transferred from one Connecticut private school to another. And I remember doing this story, and I talked to Reno directly. And the reason why he was doing that, if some of you guys aren't familiar, I'm sure some of you are, so appreciate your patience. The reason he did that is because of the school that he was currently at. He wouldn't have been allowed to enroll early into South Carolina next January if he had stayed at that school. So by transferring schools, it's going to allow him to. So he enrolled, I want to say it was, first week, second week of February. into Chester Academy, which is in Chester, Connecticut. And the school that he was previously at was also in Connecticut, Windsor, Connecticut, at Loomis Chaffee. So the school that he's going to, that he's at right now, I should say, because he did this move about a month ago, they have two talented players that also left the school that he was previously at, Loomis Chaffee. And they have entered, I guess you could say, a high school portal, if you will, and they went on over to join him. And they're both brothers, Jacob Smith and Gerard Smith. Edge, D lineman, both 4 stars. I don't think South Carolina, unfortunately, has a chance to land them. It looks like Notre Dame is the favorites right now, according to the recruiting prediction machine. At on 3, Notre Dame has the edge for both the players. Shocking, huh? You know, you're going to have twins. Shocking, they're the same. At just around 83%, and Kentucky at 3.6. South Carolina, at least as far as the recruiting prediction machine that I'm looking at for Jacob Smith. Now I'll look at Gerard, but I'm sure that's very similar. Yeah, South Carolina nowhere in the mix for that. So those are the 2 most talented players at that school with Dante. I can tell you that he'll be very, very busy with recruiting. Obviously, with Sellers coming here, I'm sure there's another added chip on his shoulder. But at the same time, too, I would not worry one bit about him going to a different school because Sellers is here now. Reno is a competitor. He wants to be at South Carolina. He wouldn't have committed to South Carolina as early as he did if he was afraid of competition. And being the son of a football coach, the head football coach of Yale at that, someone that understands recruiting very, very well for his age, he knew what he was getting himself into when he recruited early. Now, I can tell you that there's schools that are recruiting him. One school in particular, it's not going to shock people. I don't know if communication has stopped altogether, but I know around the time when Marcus Satterfield left South Carolina, he was trying to get Reno to come with him. He wanted Reno to flip his commitment. So Reno is still 1,000% committed to South Carolina, and I would expect him to be hitting the recruiting trails for a high school kid as hard as he can in the next coming weeks, but he's still doing a very good job right now from everything we've been told. R.L. Smith, my bad, talking about hurt, 600 pounds at Oklahoma. Yeah, that was the number. He was throwing around some big weight. Big Red, good to see you, Big Red. I've never understood the frustration of looking at what's working with other programs. Take what works for your program and hit the ground running. No question about it. Again, and I don't know if this was specific about Satterfield, but I think it's important to understand what can work for you, right? I mean, think about it. How many times are you, if you're working at one place for a job and you go to another place, just because you did things a certain way doesn't mean that's how they do things over there, right? It's going to work at some places it's not. And some coaches, I mean, you know, another Patriot tie-in, you look at a lot of the guys that have coached under Belichick. They go to these other places and they try to do things that replicate Belichick. Just be you. Just be you and make it work with the guys that you have. Don't try to force things and be something you're not. J-Dub, I believe I've seen 3 to 4 guys who were 4 stars behind their name. There are. And we will have more recruiting talk next week. Because once we get into next week, things will pick up just a little bit in terms of just things to share. Because now we can start talking about, okay, who might be here for the spring game and all that kind of stuff. So we can talk about that next couple weeks. Jason, what are we going to do? We have Sellers, Reno, Rattler could come back. So I don't expect Rattler. I think Rattler after this season, he's done. Sellers and Reno. Sellers, of course, will have the advantage because he will have a full year ahead of Reno. But the beauty with Reno is he's going to be enrolling in January of next year. So that will give Reno an opportunity to get caught up. And like I was saying before, kind of comparing it to Clemson, Clemson has done a very good job of being able to create competition in that QB room. And if you're South Carolina, that's what you want. You want competition like that. You want to be able to feel good knowing, like, hey, look, someone goes down, something happens, whatever the case may be, building depth. You want to be able to have a QB room that's so deep that you don't have to worry about any of those possibilities. Something happens, you're going to be able to combat it in some shape, way, or form. So Reno's going to come in here. He's going to be competitive, no question about it. And again, sorry with the allergies, scratching my nose and scratchy voice tonight. Reno's going to come in here and he's going to be ready to go. He's going to be ready to go, and Sellers will have a full year on him. No question about that. But no, I don't expect Rattler to come back. R.L. Smith, we're going to keep the best ones if we can. No question. I mean, guys went to the portal, and it's not just the quarterback conversation. We're talking about any position. It will just happen. I mean, it's college football, and that's just where we are these days. Over the hour mark, but I'm going to try to hit everyone's questions before we sign on out. J-Dub, Jason, if Spencer comes back, yeah. I don't expect that to happen. J Diz, South Carolina beats UNC. 8+ wins is doable. If we lose, probably go 8 wins and under. I haven't looked at the schedule quite yet in terms of, okay, this will be a win, that will be a loss, or, kind of just doing what we do either as fans or in the media, and we kind of just go down the list. Without looking at it, I think that 8 to 9 win mark in the regular season, that's kind of what I'm eyeing. That's not to say that they can't be better than that, but strictly speaking about the regular season, that's kind of what I'm expecting. 9 wins, 9+ wins. I just think, again, how quickly can this offense figure things out where they don't put themselves in a situation where, like you mentioned, that UNC game, I don't like swing game, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. I give teams credit. I know they schedule these games now years, sometimes decades in advance, it feels like. But I give USC credit for having the friggin' balls to go out there and play a Power 5 school week 1 instead of playing a friggin' JV team. It's tough to do something like that, knowing that, obviously not from a national championship standpoint, not to be a wet blanket for anyone that has those dreams or going to Vegas and betting on the Gamecocks, have at it. But it obviously can alter a season pretty early if you're not able to come bounce back from it. But I would look at that game and say, hey, look, they're able to go out there, regardless of how pretty the game is itself. If you get a win, like you mentioned, Jay Diz, that's a non-conference game. But as we all know, that's not an easy one. I mean, that's a team right there that could be playing in the conference championship next year in the ACC. And then you got to play Clemson at the end of the year. Another team could be in the conference champion, right? So I give USC credit. USC credit, not backing down from a Power 5 team. Big Red, do we know if the guys who were suspended from the team will be able to rejoin by next season, if at all? So Shane Beamer said last Thursday that at this time, they are not with the team. They're still suspended from the team. Did not address any of them by name. But he said all 3 are still suspended, not with the team, and that he doesn't anticipate them rejoining the team anytime soon. Now, what does soon mean? Is soon meaning the spring? Is soon meaning August? Is soon meaning, what were we talking about here? The way I look at it is it's truly going to be a day-by-day thing. And I'm not saying day by day by saying, all right, next week or the week after, they're going to be back with the team. I think they're going to have to deal with some things, how the school's going to handle all of it, right? So I don't feel like it's going to be a rushed process. It's going to take some time. If any of them were to be back, I can't see it happening until fall camp. So I don't expect any of these guys to be back with the team this spring. Again, that is just a gut feeling based on the things that we've been able to gather, as well as what Shane Beamer said last Thursday, as far as those 3 players are concerned. Carolina goes. Don Staley has built the women's basketball version of what Alabama football is. Yeah, I mean, and we can look at it from a women's basketball standpoint, right? Tennessee women's basketball for years with Pat Summitt. Gino Auriemma with UConn. I mean, that's just a women's basketball comparison. And no disrespect to Gino, no disrespect to Pat. What those two were able to do with their programs, obviously Dawn has a ways to go. And that's not trying to get the fans upset, but I think anyone that has followed women's basketball for a long period of time, even if you want to throw Dawn that what should have been, I think a lot of us feel that way, what should have been Dawn's third, which would have been her second title, the COVID year. Dawn has 3. You want to say that? Go at it. That's fine. But she still has a long ways to go before talking about those two. And I know from talking to people that close to Dawn, she has the utmost respect for both, but she really, really has the utmost respect for Pat Summitt. So to even put her name in the same conversation as Pat, I know for Dawn, she does not take that lightly. And I would be sure she would be the first to tell you she has some work to do in order to get up to a level like that. Wrapping things up. If you guys have any more questions, fire away. But if not, this is what I will say as we come to a close here on this March 7th edition of Talking Tuesday Nights. Gamecock football spring practices will begin on Tuesday, March 14th. Trying to bring up the schedule here because USC just sent it out the other day. Give you guys kind of a idea of what it's going to look like. So pro day for USC, that will take place at noon on Monday. Okay. That will take place at noon on Monday. Public viewing. All spring practices are closed to the general public with the exception of the Garnet Black spring game. So to answer that question, I know a lot of people feels like that's a question that gets brought up at least the last couple of years post-COVID because Beamer had talked about hopefully being able to do that in the near future. It's not happening this year. Not going to happen this year. It didn't happen, obviously, the last 2 years, but no soup for you. Tuesday, that will be the first practice. Practice will be at 9:20. It will be open to the media, and then Beamer will be speaking at 12:30 on that day. So we will have video highlights for you. We will have updates so that we can all sit here and talk about how amazing Rattler is looking in just shorts and a helmet, or wow, did you see Sellers throw the ball 60 yards and no shoulder pads? And we can do all this talking season crap that we all enjoy to do. So we will do that. We'll hear from Beamer as well. And then the team that will be back at it on Thursday for practice number 2. But the interesting thing will be that Wednesday press conference. That will be the coordinators. And this is something that I enjoy this time of the year. It may be the reason I enjoy it a little bit more than maybe, I don't know, some other people, is just because when Muschamp was here, we never had a chance to listen to the coordinators unless it was, spring and right before the start of the season. Like now we're spoiled. Thank God Beamer does it this way. It should be done this way, honestly. But we're able to talk to the coordinators throughout the course of the season. We even get some special teams love in there for Pete Lembo, who I am very excited to talk to him again and being able to ask him questions about some of the guys they brought in, like a guy like Nick Elksness, how much he takes pride in blocking and playing special teams, a guy like Eddie Lewis coming in, the impact he can have as not just a receiver, but as a return specialist. There's some talented guys that USC has coming back on their roster that made an impact on special teams, right? Kai Kroger, Mitch Jeter coming back, phenomenal year. Even Hunter Rogers. I mean, the impact he was able to have. But to be able to bring in some talented new faces, it's one that I'm sure Lembo is all smiles about. So that will be the case on Wednesday next week. So again, Monday, pro timing day at USC. That will be at noon. We'll have highlights from that. We'll hear from players. We'll scatter that, I'm sure, in Gamecock Central from Monday, Tuesday, and throughout the rest of the week. On Tuesday, practice number 1, 9:20 in the morning. Unfortunately, closed to the general public. Media will be able to go there for periods 1 through 6. We will have highlights from that. Beamer will speak at 12:30 on Tuesday of next week. And then next Wednesday, the coordinators will hold a press conference. Time right now is to be determined. So that's the schedule, kind of looking ahead to next week a little bit. Gamecock Ryan, appreciate you listening. Appreciate everyone listening tonight here on this GC Live Talking Tuesday nights. Intern Joe, again, off tonight. He's alive. He's not in the closet. We didn't tie him up and throw him in the closet. It's just spring break. Let the boys be boys, right? Let the girls be girls too. Appreciate everyone tuning in tonight. If you missed any of our program, head on over to the Gamecock Central YouTube page. You can catch this show in its entirety right there. Or if you want to listen to it from a podcast version, head on over to wherever you listen to your podcasts, and you'll be able to download this episode and listen to it in its entirety. And if you're not a subscriber to Gamecock Central already, I'm telling you right now, as someone that came on down this area, message boards, all that stuff, I was never involved with it. Being able to not just work for it, but being able to follow it the last couple of years, even before I got into GC, but to see it now with the movement over to On3 and just all the other tools they've been able to add since making the move from Rivals to On3 now. Sign up. I'm telling you, sign up. This isn't just like a salesman pitch. Take advantage of it. Spring football, there's going to be a lot of stories, recruiting, insider information. West and Chris, two of the best in the game when it comes to recruiting. So head on over to Gamecock Central. Take advantage of that. You can sign up today for just $29.99 through August 31st. Appreciate everyone that tuned in tonight. Frederick, what's going on? Appreciate you watching tonight. I'm going to go have myself a little bit of a tea, maybe a little rum in there. Honey, I think a high school football coach told me to do that. Hope my mom's not watching. I promise that's not why the rum was missing. All right, everyone, have yourself a good night. We'll do it again next week.